Test review number 3, Chapter 4, Microprocessors. You need a used processor for an old system that is sitting, just taking up space. The processor needs to be 32-bit processor but have 64-bit capabilities. Which of the following would you choose? Would it be an Intel Pentium 4, Intel Itanium, Pentium 4 Extreme Edition, Core 2 Duo, or Intel Duo Pentium? Well, if you're smart, you're going to choose an Intel Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. If your CPU fan breaks, what kind of damage occurs to your CPU? Well, that would be thermal damage or heat damage. You purchase a new Intel CPU for your computer. Which socket will you install the CPU into on the motherboard? Well, that would be the 1156 socket if it's an Intel. CompTIA says to store a CPU temporarily where before it's installed on a PC. Well, CompTIA always goes strictly by the rules, and the rules say keep it inside an anti-static bag. You're installing a CPU into your motherboard. When you install the processor, you are inserting it perpendicular with the motherboard. What kind of processor will allow this? Well, that's called a single edge cartridge, or SEC. Remember, this is the processor that was mounted on a small circuit board that was then inserted into an expansion slot on the on the motherboard. So it's a single edge cartridge, or SEC. You want to build a gaming PC that is as quiet as possible when you are running it as to not take away from the sound effects of the games you're playing. What component would be most beneficial to you in building the PC? Well, that would be liquid cooling. Liquid cooling is extremely quiet. When you make a processor go faster than it is intended to go, you are doing what to the processor? Well, I hope by now you know that's called overclocking it. Between a Pentium 4 with Hyperthread, an AMD Athlon XP, an AMD Athlon 64X2, an Intel Core 2 Quad, or an AMD Pentium 4, which one of these is going to give you the largest amount of performance? Well, that would be the Intel Core 2 Quad, Quad being the key there. What characteristic is the most important for performing single threading tasks as fast as possible? I hope you remember that would be the clock speed. Clock speed is very important when you're doing that. Roger is having problems with the computer he is running in an auto repair shop work area. The computer continues to overheat and shut down. What can Roger do temporarily until he can install a water cooling system in his computer? Well, as soon as he can, he should find somewhere else to put that computer that is a cooler location. Get it out of the heat. Jillian, a new computer tech, has been assigned to work on a computer that will start up but run less than a minute before shutting down. The computer also will just simply lock up. Can you give Jillian some help as to where the problem may be? Well, by now you should know, we've got an overheating problem. The CPU is overheating, so look at the areas that possibly could cause the overheating. Why must thermal paste be applied between the heatsink and the CPU? Well, thermal paste aids in the transfer of energy from the CPU to the heatsink. It is a solid, therefore it conducts the heat better than air, and it's going to dissipate that heat off of that CPU better. When logical cores appear as real physical cores to the operating system, we refer to this as what? That's called hyper-threading. Jenny is assembling a new PC from parts. When you ask her if she needs to borrow some thermal compound, she looks at her heatsink and says no. Why is that? Well, because fans often come with thermal compound pre-applied on the bottom of the heatsink, especially an OEM fan. Do you know the main difference between a CPU's clock speed and the bus speed of the computer? Well, you should know by now the clock speed is the internal speed of your CPU, while the bus speed is the speed of your system. Which cache level is the smallest on a CPU? Been over this and over this. That would be L1, or level 1. Ben is working on a new batch of school computers that have just come in to be upgraded. He asks you for some thermal compound and states that he needs to reapply the thermal compound even though he will not be replacing the CPUs on the machines. What should you tell Ben? Well, you need to tell Ben that applying thermal paste is not a maintenance issue and does not need to be done unless you are replacing a CPU or heatsink. Sally calls and says her computer runs fine for 25-30 minutes, but then just shuts down. What should you suspect is causing the problem? Well, if the computer just shuts down like that, obviously we've got a overheating problem, and in this instance, since it goes 25 or 30 minutes and not seconds, you got an internal dust buildup inside the system that's prohibiting the flow of air. What is the first layer in transferring heat away from the CPU? Well, here's another one I've been over several times. It's called thermal paste. An active CPU cooling solution contains which parts? Well, that would be a heatsink, an attached fan, and thermal compound between the heatsink and the CPU.